Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem. I hope you can hear me, and with the help of God, in just a moment, I hope you will be able to see me. Shalom. Today, the second day of the month of Cheshvan of the year 5777, corresponding to the 3rd of November of the year 2016, and I will be grateful for a response from those of you in the online Bet Midrash instant messaging application. Please let me know that you can hear me satisfactorily at this moment and see, well, that's good. Today, the 2nd of Cheshvan is actually, to my very great regret, the last time we shall meet before my necessary interval until Monday the 21st of November, since I will on this coming Sunday be leaving Jerusalem to travel to London, England, and I will be returning at the end of the week before the week beginning 20th of November. I'll be back in Jerusalem, God willing, by the 18th. And with the help of God, I hope to get myself together in order to be able to continue our program, which is very precious to me personally, when I return, God willing, on the 21st of November. And I will be notifying you of the exact date and timetable. And we have indeed just this week reached, I think, a very satisfactory point at which, since we do need to make the break, we can do so. We've been meeting now for several months. We started after the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and we had the last 10 days of Tammuz. We had 4 weeks of the month of Av, with the exception of a period towards the end when we had to make a break. We resumed for much of Elul, and we've been learning in Tishrei also, and here we are in the month of Cheshvan. And in the time since we have been studying together, I think we have quite a good record of what has been accomplished. We studied the whole of the book of Daniel in the Hebrew text. We looked at every chapter, every section, and we went into the commentators, the truly basic commentators of the rabbinical tradition, Rashi, Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, Radak, and Metzudat David, and particular interest, I think, were the commentaries of the Malbim, Rabbi Meir Leibush, the Ukrainian commentator of the 19th century, and I think we really did succeed in seeing how those ancient prophecies relate to what we actually observe unfolding in the world today. In the sphere of the Mishnah study also, we have had, I think, a very great accomplishment, which is to complete 3 tractates, including 2 that are fairly well known to many students in the Torah community, the tractates of Sanhedrin and Makot, followed by the last tractate we completed yesterday, the tractate of Horayot. And I think that many students would be jealous to know that others had studied this tractate as we have, and would have wanted to be able to study it. It's not always in the regular route of people studying, but since we have made this siyum, and then yesterday also we completed our study of the chapters in Isaiah of the suffering servant, although I will return to the subject later on today. But I would like to take this point today at the on the threshold of our break of a little over 2 weeks, just to speak more generally about the program of the Kolel studies. And I'm particularly stimulated to do this now because of a couple of themes that have been coming up in our Bet Midrash instant messaging. One of them being the voice of some of the women present asking whether the study of the Mishnah is really appropriate for women, and another altogether from one of the male members of the Kolel, regular, expressing the feeling that particularly the tractate of Horayot was very challenging, even more so than the tractates of Sanhedrin and of Makot. Well, you know, there's just so much to learn. One member of our Kolel was speaking about whether we would be able to take a look at the Derech Hashem, the way of God, the outstanding work of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, as a way of better understanding the fundamental beliefs, the foundation of the belief system of our Torah, because that work, the Derech Hashem of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, is so very fundamental, and indeed I have it referenced on every study schedule page that comes out on the Azamra website. I always have a fixed link to Ramchal's work, because I think it is absolutely fundamental to understand the whole Torah outlook and worldview. And I wish there was time for this, and I wish there was time for many other things. I'm very conscious that we should be spending time looking at the weekly portion, and I'm very conscious that we should be spending time looking at practical guidelines for behavior, namely the halachot. And in the tractates we've been studying recently in the Mishnah, the issues dealt with are rather remote from the halachot that apply in our everyday lives. Well, I would say at this point that I do plan, God willing, when we resume after from Monday 21st of November, to be going into areas that have a more direct bearing on the halacha through the Mishnah. I do, as I've mentioned, hope to begin next the tractate of Chulin, and I'd like to say a word about that today as well as we go further. The tractate of Chulin, which is in the section of Kodoshim of the Mishnah, the fifth order of the Mishnah, dealing with temple sacrifices, but Chulin is precisely an expression relating to non-temple slaughter of animals. In the context of the wider framework of the laws of the temple, the tractate of Chulin deals not only with the whole subject of shchita, of kosher slaughter of animals, and also of trefot, dealing with all of the different kinds of conditions that may render an animal unfit for Israelite consumption. It also speaks about other areas of kashrut, including the laws of separation of meat and milk, and also has some very interesting other details that it discusses, including the very beautiful mitzvah of shiluach haken, when a person encounters a nest of a pure species of bird where the mother is sitting on the eggs or the chicks, that the person may only take the eggs or the chicks if they first send away the mother. This and various other subjects are also in the tractate of Chulin, and there are many areas there where the subjects do have a bearing on our practical lives today, in our kitchens and in our eating habits, and in knowing how to find our way around the supermarket, or our if we want to find supplies of meat, what we have to be concerned about. So there is certainly a subject relating to our lives today. And indeed, after we complete Chulin, God willing, which is a sizable hunk in itself, it's actually more chapters than Sanhedrin, it's about 14 chapters. After Chulin, I do see there the tractate of Shabbat. Well, now the tractate of Shabbat is probably quite different from what many people imagine. It looks at the Shabbat in a very different way from the way we may think of the Shabbat as being symbolized by a table with the chalot and the cup of kiddush and the candles and family seated around. And the tractate of Shabbat goes to the Shabbat in a very different way, taking off straight from the fourth commandment, you shall do no labor on the Shabbat, and the Torah has a very clearly defined system. What are the 39 labors prohibited on the Shabbat and their offshoots, and the by far the most of the tractate of Shabbat is bound up with the definition of all of these labors and what they may involve in practice. Certainly this will give us many opportunities to look at our practical observance of the Shabbat, and another incentive to be studying after Chulin, the tractate of Shabbat, is that there is the most beautiful edition of the Mishnah of Shabbat, which is available both in Hebrew and in English, which has the distinction of having wonderful illustrative drawings by a most talented Israeli artist, illustrating all of the multiple situations which the Mishnah of Shabbat brings up in a way that is very graphically appealing to every child and to the child in every one of us. So when we get to the study of Shabbat, I will be able to show you the unforgettable images by the artist that calls himself Yoni, and we shall get this very beautiful way of grasping what is being discussed in Tractate Shabbat. So many of the subjects in the tractates of Chulin and Shabbat are related to our basic practice of the Torah, but that cannot be said of the great majority of the tractates of the Mishnah. The tractates of the Mishnah cover the entire range of the 613 commandments as we have them come down to us with through the oral Torah. And that includes all of the commandments that apply when the temple is standing, all of the commandments that apply to the land of Israel. Some of those are applicable only when the temple is standing. Others are applicable today and at all times. And some of the agricultural laws have a bearing on practice outside of Israel. There's a whole realm of other laws of marriage and divorce. Further away from most people's regular lives are the laws of purity and impurity that would affect the priests and participants in the temple in temple times. And there is a distinction between the halachot, the laws that apply to us in our daily lives, the laws of prayer and the laws of Shabbat and festivals, basic laws in family life, basic business laws, and the understanding of the entire Torah through the 6 orders of the Mishnah and through the 5 books of Moses. And I'd like to explain some of the background of why in this Kolel program I've chosen to focus on 2 areas. The area of the Mikra, the Bible, and the area of the Mishnah. I know that we could have, if I had the time available, we could go on with these classes endlessly, and we could look at all kinds of different areas. We could spend, if I had the time, I would love to spend hours every day on the Mishnah, and hours every day on the Tanakh, and hours every day on Likutei Moharan, and hours every day on the Zohar, and hours every day on Derech Hashem, and also looking at ways for following the Torah by people who are Jewish by birth, Jewish by choice, who associate with Israel, who are Noahites, who are people of faith, people of expanded consciousness. I wish we could go on and on and on. But we do live in a finite universe. I've permitted myself not to focus much on the weekly parasha for the reason that I do have my series of the commentaries on the weekly portion. I actually have 2 series of commentaries. One is called Universal Torah, and the other is called Torah for the Nations. And both of them are available on the Samra website, and both of them can be downloaded, and you can, as you know, subscribe to the Torah sheets to receive them in your email. But as I said, I've permitted myself not to address the weekly parsha too much in our sessions here in the Kolel, because the commentaries are available. There's always more that you could discuss with the parsha. We could go on and on and on. But in a limited world, one has to limit oneself. So my main reason for choosing these 2 areas of Tanakh and of Mishnah is because of the rabbinic teaching, which is in the Talmud and part of the Halakha, that a person should divide their time into 3. A person should divide their Torah study time into 3 to study, first of all, the Mikra, the Bible, secondly, the Mishnah, the codification of the oral law, and thirdly, what is called Gemara, which would be taking off both from the Mishnah into the intricacies of the reasons for the different oral laws, and also going off into the Kabbalah and the mystical wisdom. All of that comes under the category of the Gemara. Halachot would come under the category of Mishnah. So those are the 3 areas that our sages advise us to divide our Torah study time into: study of Mikra, study of Mishnah, and of Gemara. Well, the Mikra, you have the weekly Torah commentaries, and everybody should be studying the weekly portion. That is one of the great foundations of all Torah study. It is a mitzvah each week to study the weekly portion in ideally to read it twice over in the Hebrew and once in the translation, be that the Aramaic Targum or the translation of the Torah into our own language, English, or into any other language that you speak, that practice of reading the weekly portion twice in the text and once in translation, that is an absolute foundation which I hope everybody is able to follow. So the other component of the Tanakh, which is the first of the three elements in the rabbinic pathway, that is the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim. And that's precisely what we have been studying, what I hope to carry on studying. A knowledge of the written Tanakh is absolutely fundamental to not only to higher and deeper knowledge of the Torah, but also to simply being a Yehudi, being an Israelite, because we have to understand our history, we have to understand our destiny, we have to understand where we have gone wrong as according to the reproofs of our prophets, and we have to understand how to go right. And all this is derived from the Tanakh, which is a terribly neglected area of study in our time. Well, also on Azamra, I have my Know Your Bible course of 2 chapters of Bible a day, which is a terrific way to go through the whole Tanakh. It can be done by every weekday studying 2 chapters of Tanakh, and this way you can complete the entire Bible in 1 year. I've been doing this myself for many years now. I start right after Sukkot, and so does the annual cycle that I set up now 11 years ago. And from the day after Sukkot, we go into Joshua, go through Joshua, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and then we take off into the prophet to Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel. Then we go off into the 12 so-called minor prophets. We go into the wisdom literature, Proverbs, and Job. We go into Chronicles and the great 3 prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, all in the space of 1 year at the rate of 2 chapters a day. But as we saw with Daniel, sometimes you want to go more deeply into the text, and that was why, besides the available Bible commentaries from Azamra for daily study in the Know Your Bible cycle, that was why I decided in this Kolel to have a Nach segment. And my plan for the ensuing section of our Nach studies is to go to the book of Mishlei, Proverbs. The book of Mishlei truly is worthy of its name. The wisdom literature in Hebrew, the 3 works of Job, Proverbs, and Psalms are Iyov, Mishlei, Tehillim, Aleph, Mem, Taf, that is Emet, the Emet literature. In English, they're called the wisdom literature. In Hebrew, they're known as the Emet literature. And Tehillim is something that people should be reading every day. And I wish there was time for a Tehillim class as well, and maybe we'll find time for it. We did look at a couple of chapters of Tehillim earlier on, after we completed Daniel, and perhaps we will get to that, but for the moment my plan is to go ahead to Mishlei, Proverbs, and to the first 9 chapters of Mishlei, which are a little different from the rest of the work. The first 9 chapters of Mishlei, which are the introduction, are in the form of a succession of discourses in the voice of the Torah, speaking about the life of true wisdom. From chapter 10 onwards to near the end of the book are chapter after chapter, verse after verse of 1 sentence pearls of wisdom, coming at you thick and fast at the rate of an average of 30 proverbs per chapter from chapter 10 onwards. Each one an absolutely perfectly crafted epigram on which one could spend hours and days in study, thought, and contemplation. And my plan at the moment, because I do very much want to get to the book of Job, and if we went into each and every proverb of Mishlei, we'd never finish. So I hope to study the first 9 chapters of Mishlei, which are in the form of discourses. And after all the succession of Proverbs, towards the end of the book of Proverbs, in the final chapters, it returns to the form of discourse, a very opaque and esoteric discourse. We shall look, God willing, at that. And then after that, my eyes are set on the book of Job, which I consider to be one of the most important existential documents for all humanity to study. So that is the Nach component of our Kolel. The second of the three divisions of rabbinical study is recommended to be the Mishnah, and we have been doing that. We've been studying the Mishnah, and I know that it has been hard going for people. The Mishnah is by far from being a simple document, even though the Hebrew of the Mishnah grammatically is most crystal clear, but the actual meaning of the Mishnahs, without extensive knowledge of what's going on around each phrase and what happens elsewhere in the Torah where that phrase is used, the Mishnah can be very confusing and hard to understand. Well, when I started my own journey into the Torah back in the late 1970s, when I started to learn the Chumash and then Rashi, I was advised to go into the study of the Mishnah, which I did, and found the Mishnahs very beneficial, because often when you first look at them, you don't know how much you don't know, and I did find the relative simplicity of the Mishnah attractive compared to what little I had heard of people studying Gemara, which sounded to be a really formidable venture. There is a certain snobbery surrounding the study of the Gemara, that is to say the Talmud. The Talmud is without question the most complex of all of the study materials of the Torah. The particular way of thought of the sage of the Talmud, the language of the Talmud, the highly elusive use of words, and also the enormous stock in trade of knowledge one needs just to follow what they're talking about, makes the Talmud extremely difficult. And the rabbis themselves, who held by this threefold division of study, they said, well, when a boy starts, you don't throw him into the Talmud. Let him start with the Mikra, with the written Torah. There's an explicit Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers. A young boy should start with the Mikra, with the written text of the Tanakh, at the age of 5. And only after 5 years, which gives him enough time to read all of the books of the Tanakh, then at the age of 10, let him come to the Mishnah, for which he will be well prepared, because he will have studied already the Tanakh. He would have studied the portions. He will have studied Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, etc. We all saw how hard it was for us in the tractate of Horayot to follow what was going on, because we were not familiar with the chapters in Leviticus and the other chapters that have a bearing on the Mishnah. So the rabbi said, let the boy first study the whole written Torah and get to know it perfectly, as little boys would if they weren't distracted by internet and cell phones and entertainment devices and all kinds of other gadgets like kids are in the contemporary world. Years ago, children attained an inside-out knowledge of the Hebrew text of the Tanakh. And certainly that should be the starting place for everybody. And after that, said the sages, for the second division of study, that is the Mishnah, a young boy would start at the age of 10. And only at the age of 15, when he had managed to master the whole Mishnah, then he would come to the Gemara. And that makes sense, and that was something which instinctively I personally did when I was beginning on my way. I decided not to put off the study of Mishnah. I did feel like a 5-year-old child when I started at the age of 27 trying to crack my teeth over Hebrew. But I said, look, I'm not going to wait another 5 years to start the Mishnah, but I can certainly defer the study of the Talmud. And indeed, if a person has a teacher of Mishnah who can explain to them what's going on in the Mishnah and what is the surrounding knowledge you need in order to understand what the Mishnah is saying, then this itself counts as a study of both Mishnah and Gemara. I'd like to say a word about my own the strategy which I personally took in navigating the Mishnah. A few years after I resumed my Hebrew studies, I started them at the age of 27. A few years after that, in the early 1980s, I first pretty much discovered myself that amazing later work, the Mishneh Torah of Moses Maimonides, the Rambam. People often confuse these two works, the Mishnah, which is nearly 2,000 years old, and the Mishneh Torah of Maimonides, which was composed a little over 800 years ago, and which indeed presents the entire oral law, and that is its purpose. The difference between the ancient Mishnah of Rabbi Judah the Prince and Maimonides' Mishneh Torah is that unlike the Mishnah, Maimonides wrote a work that is completely comprehensible if you follow it from beginning to end without any need for surrounding knowledge. The approach of Maimonides in the Mishnah is completely linear, A, B, C, D. Let us start with A, and only when we understand A shall we go on to B. We shall do so in a completely linear, rational matter, and I will not tell you anything in an earlier stage that requires something that you will only find out at a later stage. I will give you all the information you need to understand what I'm saying on the spot. That is the approach of Maimonides. And when I did first discover Maimonides' code, the Mishneh Torah, in the early 80s in the library of the synagogue, I immediately saw that this was a far clearer and more complete statement of the oral law than the Mishnah. Our Mishnah is highly elusive. Our Mishnah misses out all kinds of things that are only supplemented, included in the Talmudic commentary on the Mishnah. But Maimonides' Mishneh Torah is actually a perfect expression of the oral law. It's in 1,000 chapters with immaculate planning and conception, with an architecture of more than encyclopedia, because in an encyclopedia each item is arranged alphabetically. But in the Mishneh Torah, Maimonides expands the subject and covers the entire subject in a logical unfolding, where each step supplements and builds upon what you've learned before, until when you complete the Mishneh Torah, you actually have the entire oral law, and you have the entire conspectus, the entire wider view. Well, I already knew in the mid-1980s that the late Rabbi of Lubavitch had instituted in 1984 an annual cycle of Maimonides' study of the Mishneh Torah at the rate either of 3 chapters a day to complete it in 1 year, or 1 chapter a day to complete it in 3 years. It was not until the mid-1990s, when I was just getting over into my mid-40s, that I decided I have to jump into this. I was really at a dead end in my own studies at that time. I was spending most of my day in my various livelihood activities and projects which were of a Torah nature, translations of the writings of Rabbi Nachman and commentaries, but my own knowledge of the halakha, my own knowledge of the the 630 commandments was woefully lacking, and in 1994 in the summer I decided I'm jumping into the 3-chapter a day study of Maimonides' Code. And I would like to say that there are 2 possible strategies for studying the entire oral Torah. One is to study the Mishnah, 2,000-year-old Mishnah of Rabbi Judah the Prince. The other is to study Maimonides' Code, the Mishnah Torah. And with thanks to God, I've succeeded in doing both of them. And I do know that my ability to understand the Mishnah today stands upon the studies of Maimonides I've been carrying out since 1994. In fact, just this last Sukkot, when the annual cycle of Rambam study was completed, I completed my 24th circuit of Rambam's Mishnah Torah and have now embarked on the 25th cycle. And as you go through it and you review it time and time again, everything falls into place. The landscape becomes familiar. The details become familiar. The Torah is undoubtedly difficult. This is a legal code, be it the Mishnah, be it the Mishnah, or be it the Mishnah Torah, or be it the Talmud. These are legal works with highly precise formulations, and it takes time just to understand the various ifs and buts that are being discussed in these works. But as you review and review, the whole thing falls into place. And if one is looking for a strategy to get the whole oral Torah, it's certainly desirable to study all of the Mishnah. There is something that comes out of the study of the Mishnah that does not come out of the Mishneh Torah. Out of the Mishnah, one sees the discussions of the different sages, the wisdom that comes in incidentally, the many remarkable interconnections between different areas of the Torah. What comes out of the study of the Mishneh Torah, Maimonides' law code, is this comprehensive knowledge of the Torah, the definition of each and every one of the 613 commandments, a clear grasp of the divisions, the major contours of each commandment and the detailed laws as they may apply in various different circumstances. And really an understanding of the Mishneh Torah and understanding of the Mishnah are complementary. What you gain from the Mishneh Torah can only supplement what you know in the Mishnah. And so these are 2 strategies which at different times in my life I followed either one or the other, or now both. I do daily today study Maimonides' Code and daily make a study of the Mishnah besides our Kolel studies. So this is the second component of the threefold path of the rabbis of Mikra, written Bible, Mishnah, which I've just been speaking about, and the third element, the Gemara. Well, the Gemara, in the minds of most people, is the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, and some people are aware there's also the Jerusalem Talmud. Well, the 2 Talmuds are, as I said earlier, formidably difficult works to study. One thing I can tell you for sure is that without a knowledge of the Tanakh and without a knowledge of the Mishnah, nobody can really figure out the Talmud. One may attend a few Talmud classes and find the presentation very stimulating and interesting, which it is, but to really understand the discussion of the Talmud in their proper context and to understand why the rabbis of the Talmud are discussing the different Mishnahs in the way that they are, and why they are pulling in Mishnahs from all kinds of different parts of the 6 order of the Mishnah to shed light on others. To understand this, you have to have a knowledge of the Tanakh and a knowledge of the Mishnah. And that is why, since time is limited and I cannot provide all of the 3 components in the way I might desire, I feel that by giving people a basis in the Tanakh and a basis in the Mishnah, this is the best possible preparation for getting into the study of Gemara. Well, the Gemara is not only the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud. The Gemara is also the whole tradition of our faith, such that Derech Hashem, the way of God, books about our belief system, the Kabbalah and Chassidut, they're all Gemara. And that was my original intention in the design of our program, to have Mikra, Tanakh, Mishnah in the middle, and finally a section of the Gemara of Chassidut, of Rabbi Nachman and some Zohar. What has happened, and I know you've caught on, is that my own enthusiasm for the Mishnah and for the Tanakh studies has normally led me to go over time on both of those at the expense of the third element of Chassidut and Kabbalah. I hope we did make up a bit yesterday for this by our study of the Zohar commentary on the sections of the suffering servant in Isaiah, but I know that it's not quite the same as having a regular spot. In order really to cover all the ground I'd like to cover, we'd have to have a longer time frame each day and perhaps even more meetings each week. And my personal question is whether I'm able to do that together with all the other different things that I'm involved with. Anyway, what I've been doing today is to present you with some of my thoughts about what we've been doing and why we've been doing it and where I hope to go forward. In the couple of weeks that follow, I would like you to think carefully about your feelings about our studies. I'll be, as always, very grateful if you will send me your ideas and your thoughts on how we could improve the what we are doing. And having said that, I'd like to bring this part of our session today to a conclusion, to take a brief interval, after which I would like to go back a little to our studies of Isaiah, the suffering servant, and also to take a look at, this time, some Chassidut from Rabbi Nachman, talking about our weekly portion of Noah. So with the help of God, I'll be back in just a few minutes for more studies today. Shalom.
Ma na 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 كان نفسي ساراي 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 علافي كمويم كاين نفسي سهرك 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 She sang
Shalom again, my dear friends, shalom. Well, I'd like to continue our studies today with firstly a kind of summary of what we discussed relating to Isaiah chapters 52 and 53, and then to go on to some Hasidic insights into this week's portion from Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. But just to look back over our studies of the chapters in Isaiah, you know, one of the reasons that so many people are interested in this chapter is because it does play such a part in Christian theology, and one of the features, it must be said, of that area is that all kinds of verses and sections of Tanakh are ripped completely out of context in order to support what they purport to support. There are certainly in our rabbinic tradition a whole enormous number of midrashim, of allegorical teachings based upon verses where the allegory seems to completely depart from the meaning of the text, and or to go off so far on a tangent from the text. But in approaching the chapters of Isaiah 52 and 53, one of the points that I tried to make throughout the study is that these chapters must be seen in their context. You cannot rip them out of the context. As we saw, the context is addressing Jerusalem, Zion, and Israel in different ways. And it is this Eved, this servant that is Yaskil, he should be wise, who embodies the entire people. And I was absolutely bowled over when I first encountered the section in the Zohar that we studied yesterday, which takes those chapters in Isaiah where it takes them, because it's particularly from the looking at the chapters from the Christian theological perspective. For example, one of the most astounding things that does not fit at all is the section towards the end of chapter 53, which speaks about chapter 53, verse 9. He gave his grave to be with the wicked. Well, if that's applied to the as it were the Christian story, then where is the grave, and where are the wicked that this grave is by? And however, as soon as we unravel this chapter through the insights of the Holy Zohar that tells us this is speaking about the soul of Moshe and the suffering of Moshe and the destiny of Moshe, the whole thing is completely different. That verse in particular suddenly becomes comprehensible when we understand that Moses is alive, and Moses is all about being alive. To have Moses out of the Holy Land, the land of the living, that is death among the wicked, when he's buried outside the land, which is his ultimate sacrifice of his very burial place for the sake of all the souls that are to come. In other words, it was in order to rectify the souls of all Israel in our exile at the end of days that Moses submitted to God. He stopped praying when God said, "That's it. You know, you have to do this. You have to be buried outside the land. I'm not going to accept any more prayers from you to go into the land." That was Moses' self-sacrifice for the sake of Israel. Well, from the perspective of students of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, this chapter in Isaiah, which is quoted numerous times by Rabbi Nachman, indeed in his closing teaching, when he speaks about the healing that comes into the world through prayer, and how through prayer is made of gathering in the souls one by one and building the house of prayer by bringing the bricks together, each brick in the house of prayer being one of the souls of Israel, a neighbor who is brought into the house of prayer. And in that section, in his final teaching, Rabbi Nachman speaks about the suffering tzaddik who may have to endure illness for the sake of the healing of the people. Rabbi Nachman speaks about this very chapter in Isaiah, chapter 53, how his illness brought healing. And the key point in the Rabbi Nachman connection is that Rabbi Nachman himself, when he gave over his final teaching, the teaching 8 in the second part of Likutei Moharan on the new year, Rosh Hashanah of the year 1810, he was surely aware that he would be leaving the world very soon, and he left the world just 18 days afterwards, on the 4th day of the festival of Sukkot of that year 1810, 18 days after he spoke about the suffering of the tzaddik. And in numerous other places in his writings, he'd written about, and to his students he spoke about his burial place. He had journeyed specifically from the town where he spent most of the later years of his life. Breslev had journeyed from there to the Ukrainian town of Uman, where he'd set his heart on being buried among the martyrs of the terrible massacre in the town of Uman in the year 1768, 4 years before Rabbi Nachman had been born. It was like a kind of Holocaust just before he was born in that town, where some minimum of 20,000 Jewish martyrs slaughtered in the space of 3 days in the summer of 1768 were buried in 2 mounds there in Uman, and Rabbi Nachman chose to be buried there. And without question, he attached exceptional importance to his burial place and to the redemptive powers of a visit to his burial place by any soul who would pray there to God and offer charity in honor of Rabbi Nachman and recite 10 psalms there. Clearly, Rabbi Nachman saw his own gravesite, which he alluded to in many times in his teachings, as part of this whole sacrificial atonement of the tzaddik for the people. I think the key point to be made is something that really comes out in one thing that we looked at during our studies on this chapter, and we looked at the piyut, the liturgical poem of Eile Ezkira, These Things Shall I Remember, recited at the peak of the Yom Kippur Avodah additional service, recounting the temple service, and then going into the terrible tale of the 10 martyrs. And being recited on the Day of Atonement, which is a day when Jewish people spend the day in absolutely naked introspection, bringing out all of our sins and transgressions in repeated confessions between ourselves and God, all the congregation together, each one pouring out his or her own heart. The refrain is of that Eile Ezkira is, we have sinned. Not that they're going to atone for us, but that we have to take responsibility. And I think this is the one of the really important aspects of this study of Isaiah 52-53, the suffering servant, that the moral is not that here was somebody who died for everybody's sins, but who came to give a way for everybody to get out of their sins. It's not that his having suffered and died, that's it. Nothing more to do. We are now faced with the challenge of taking ourselves under control, taking responsibility, confessing, and striving to improve in all the areas where we have to improve. And this is the only way to understand in Isaiah 53 the repeated expressions of astonishment in the mouths of the nations about how could it have been that we totally misunderstood him and we so looked down upon him, and there he was suffering for us. The conclusion is that we have to take responsibility for our actions. The philosophy that the tzaddik may suffer for the generation and may suffer for the sake of bringing redemption is to not to let anybody off the hook. And I think particularly in this day and age, we indeed must take responsibility for our destiny, and our destiny is part of the whole world. Since many of our Kolel members are in the United States of America, I know we stand right now at a crucial point in the history of the country of America, which since its discovery in 1492 by the West and its subsequent colonization and its struggle for independence became for people across the world the beacon of the ideal of freedom, an ideal system of government that left each citizen secure but free of government interference in his or her life. And indeed, for many, America was the ideal of the restored Jerusalem. America was seen as the new Jerusalem of the 10 tribes who settled this green and virgin land with its stunningly incredible beauty and its phenomenal resources and its ability to generate wealth. And clearly, the people of America do stand at a crossroads, and I think that we see tremendous, we can gain tremendous insight into what is happening around us by relating this very week's portion to what's going on in America right now. Our Torah portion, the portion of Noah, speaks about two of the world's greatest historical episodes of God's moral judgment on civilization. The first is the story of the flood in the time of Noah. And the second, at the end of the portion, is the story of the Pelaga, the division of the nations of the world into different language groups filled with mutual incomprehensible as a result of the audacious, the chutzpah project to build the Tower of Babel and to build a tower reaching to the heavens to make war against God for having the audacity to reside alone in the upper realm. So these two stories, the flood and the Tower of Babel, are not merely historical events that were far in the past and have nothing to do with us today. All of the stories of the Torah are stories that endlessly repeat themselves in cycles throughout history. You know, there's a very telling phrase by the late author Elie Wiesel, who said that there are some stories that happened, but they're not true. And there are others that did not happen, but are true. Well, I'm not quite sure what he meant by that phrase. What I would mean by it, what I would hope he meant, is that there are all kinds of stories in the press and on internet that are totally irrelevant to anything, which will have no enduring impact on the history of the world, even though they may have happened, but they bear no intrinsic truth. On the other hand, there are stories like the tales, like the Sipurei Ma'asiyot, the stories and tales out of which the Torah is woven, that maybe they didn't actually happen from the journalistic or from the television point of view the way the surface meaning of the text might imply, but actually the truth contained in these narratives, in the complex text of the Torah, is a far higher truth than any of these stories you find in the newspapers and on internet, on television, etc., etc. And these two, the stories of the flood and of the Tower of Babel, are about two sins, two basic sins. There were, both generations were full of sin, but the Torah picks out two basic sins, one of which typified the generation that was wiped out in the flood, and the other that was the generation that was separated and dispersed by God's confusing all of the languages after the building of the Tower of Babel. The Torah characterizes the culture of the generation of the flood as that of Hamas. Hamas, blatant robbery, violence, extortion, the employment of power to control and exploit others. Hamas, that's exactly the same word as the title of the regime of that rules currently in Gaza, term they chose specifically because of its biblical connotations of negativity and criminality. Hamas, violence. The generation of the separation of the nations at the Tower of Babel was characterized by a different sin. It was their audacity as humans, their audacity in joining together against God. They wanted to build this tower up to heaven and to take God down a notch, as it were, to say, well, we too, we can control the weather, we can control the stars, we can control the planets, we can land on Mars, we can control the earth. And like all of the other souls in the Torah, both of these two are present in our world today. The Torah is not speaking about just historical beings in bodies that were born and decay. The Torah, in the characters in the Torah, is speaking about souls that may have been incarnate in different ways in different times in history. The soul of Abel, the soul of Cain, the soul of Adam and Eve, of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, Rachel, Leah, of Moses, of Joshua. They're all present and being recycled into the generations, and so to the wicked. The wicked Nimrod, who figures in our biblical story, who was the initiator of the Tower of Babel, is a figure that is reincarnated in our time. And these two sins are present in our time. The crime of Hamas, which is the watchword of the so-called self-styled Palestinians. And on the other side, there is the hidden clique that are trying to take control of the world, who say that they are the natural and rightful and legitimate rulers. They are the enlightened, who employ scientists to control the weather, to develop new resources, to overcome all problems, to the point that they say they have no need for God. Get away from us. We're not interested in having anything to do with you or your Torah. And we do see in our culture today this group led by the proponents of abortion on call, of the so-called euthanasia of people who are considered to be of no use to society, people who are the elite that control the society, and they want to abrogate to themselves the right to educate everybody according to their own point of view for their own purposes, to prime everybody with a morality that is not the morality of the Torah, but which suits their own purposes, all to be able to put themselves in a position of perpetual control of the world. What they hope to gain by this, I really don't understand, because their embrace is that of this world, the material world. They want the wealth and the perks, the private jets, the luxury villas and mansions and palaces, the life of being attended to and served and feeling they're in control of empires, of business, finance, industrial, political, and other empires. We see how empty all this is today. It seems very much that we are witnessing in front of our eyes right now the downfall of a person and a member of a family that were seeking to embrace this world, and what they will gain from it in the world of truth is absolutely nothing except agonizing suffering at the damage they cause when they are forced to account for themselves in the world of truth. So really, the world that we have depicted in our portion of Noah, in the story of the flood and the story of the division of the peoples, is so applicable to our time. And I'm talking about the division of the peoples. We see how all of the nations are bickering with one another within nations, all the different national groups. That's one thing we see now in across Europe and across America, that there's so many different nations and peoples from east and west and center, up and down, north and south, are all mixed together in these gigantic urban conglomerations that make up contemporary civilization, and all are at odds with one another. People do not understand one another. They don't speak the same language. They may use the same word with completely different meanings. We see such a cultural and verbal confusion in the society we live in today. And the coming election in America next week is not going to actually permanently solve anything in America. And regardless of the outcome next Tuesday, America is clearly facing a period of great ructions because of a fundamental divergence of the pathways of different streams and elements in the society. There is a gigantic element that has been captured by the world of the major multinational corporations that are determining what people eat and drink and all of the products they use in their lives, the cars, the gadgets, the computers, and who wish to have a servile populace that is a homo consumens, that is, we're going to be consumer man, that will be pliable to the need of big business to sell to markets. And on the other side are the people who really do have faith in the sanctity of life, the goal of life, the purpose of life, and who wish to have a system that favors not the enrichment of the top level, but rather the freedom of the individual to go about his or her life without interference, without undue taxation. the solution of Noah and the solution of Abraham, alluded to at the beginning and the end of our portion, is really the only solution open to any of us today who cares not only about our fortunes in this physical world, but also our destiny in the world to come. Noah saw that he could not join the people of his era. Abraham likewise, after the building of the Tower of Babel, he got out of there. Abraham started in Babylon preaching the Torah of the one God, but he was persecuted, he was thrown into the furnace. Only with a miracle did he escape, and he got out of there. And the significance of Noah's Ark, which I'd like to address now, is that Noah's Ark is not only, as we may envisage it, a great sailing ship over the waters of the flood with its divisions for the animals and the humans and everything else that was needed. The Hebrew word teva is the word. And the teva itself, which we appropriately translate as the ark, is the same as the ark of the covenant in the temple and the ark in the synagogue that houses the Torah. The Torah itself contains everything. The Torah in its infinite wisdom, with its infinite levels upon levels of meaning, with the written Torah and the associated oral Torah with all of their allusions. These are really the wisdom of all of the world and all of creation. This is unimaginable. It's only when one goes into the uncharted waters of the Kabbalah that we see just how much wisdom there is in the Torah about the elements, fire, air, water, earth, about the angels, the chariot, and how it all works, the sounds, the letters, the chants of the Hebrew, their relation to the incarnations of the souls and the destinies of souls. It's all just infinite wisdom, and it's all in the Torah. And the only way for us to navigate the floodwaters of the world today, because we're being flooded mentally and emotionally, flooded by our media, flooded by the demands of the tax officials and the demands of the other government offices and the demands of our lives, the demands just to clothe, feed, house ourselves and our dependents. Our only way to stay afloat in this flood is through getting into the ark, which is the word of the Torah. And here we have our connection with Chassidut, with a very beautiful teaching of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev in Likutei Moharan, in a teaching where, among other things, Rabbi Nachman darshans the verses in our portion about the very nature of the ark. And here Rabbi Nachman tells us that the three stories of the ark allude to the three worlds. There's our physical world. Above it is the world of the heavenly bodies, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, the planets so-called. Above them is the level of the angels. These are disembodied spiritual forms that govern what goes on in the spheres of the planets, which in turn influence what goes on in the physical world on earth. And these are the three worlds that are rectified through prayer. And the way to attain prayer is through truth, through being truthful. Truth, says Rabbi Nachman, truth is God's seal. There's the ultimate truth of the Torah. There's also the truth in the heart of each and every one of us. And our inner truth, our deepest, most naked honesty with ourselves, in our situation, that truth is our surest channel of connection with God. Because truth is God's light. It is through truth that we receive the light of God. One can be in the darkest situation. When one is absolutely truthful about it, even if the truth is, God, I'm desperate. That is the truth through which God's light shines to us. And Rabbi Nachman tells us that when a person is worthy and their prayers support the three worlds, the world of the physical environment around us, the world of the stars and planets, and the world of the angels, the way to attain the prayer that accomplishes this is through truth. That is alluded to by the window that God commanded Noah to make in his ark. God says, "Tzohar ta'aseh lativa." Make a tzohar. A tzohar is a shining light. Says Rabbi Nachman, the command to Noah here was to bring light into the prayers through truth. What exactly is this Hebrew tzohar in the text of God's command to Noah to make this thing? Says Rashi, well, some say it's a precious stone that shines of itself. Others say it's a window. This was something that is illuminating Noah's ark, illuminating the word. Is it a precious stone or is it a window? Says Rabbi Nachman, the precious stone is the words of the truly righteous, the true words of Torah, of the true sages, which can be the light of truth, that when we shine it into our prayers, will illumine our prayers through the light of the teaching of the tzaddik. On the other hand, not everybody has this level of truth, but if they can make a window through which this level of truth may shine into themselves, if they're willing, even if their own speech is not on the level of the outstanding tzaddik, but they allow themselves to be primed and enhanced through the tzaddik, turning themselves into a window, expressing the teachings of the tzaddik that they have heard, that they have become familiar with. This too brings light into the words of our prayers. And a person who is on this true level of bringing truth into their words, they are sustaining all of the creation, because it is our prayers that give nourishment to the angels. It's our prayers that give nourishment to all the forces that bring blessing into the world. This may have once seemed incredible to people that mere words could actually influence the environment, but we do see today that through little messages you tap into your computer, you can get your computer, your device to do all kinds of things to configure it and to make creations that nobody would have believed possible just some years ago. And likewise, for thousands of years, the sages of the Torah have known of the power of the word. The power of the word is not used in social discourse, not part of some television debate or some speech or some message on Facebook, but the word that is spoken intimately between ourselves and God in the privacy of our own private corner, where we offer our prayers to God, where we open the Siddur or we open the Psalms and we offer our prayers. Rabbi Nachman taught the greatness and the beauty of going over and over the set prayers of the sages in the Siddur in the book of Psalms, to constantly go through our daily prayers morning, afternoon, and evening, to constantly recite the Psalms. And he also said the key is to see ourselves in the words of our prayers. And not only to see ourselves in the words of our prayers, but to see our own inner truth expressed in the prayers, and to use the prayers as the vehicle to express our own inner truth. It's easy to see how this can be done in the Shmona Esrei when we pray in the blessing for healing, and we may intend to beseech healing for ourselves, for those who are dear to us, who are close to us, for the whole house of Israel. In the blessing for appealing for blessing in the year, in the rainfall, and in the produce of the year, we may express our prayers for our livelihood and sustenance. And so too in all the prayers, Rabbi Nachman advises us to find our own personal truth and put that into the words of the prayer, and that is the window we make in the ark, the tzohar in the teva. It is that inner truth that brings to light our prayers. And so too when we express our own inner truth in our idbodedut, in our own private personal prayers each day, each one the prayers of our hearts. Here too it is this truth which lifts our prayers up to God Almighty and bring God to accept our prayers. Baal Shem Tov once said that no sooner have we uttered our prayers, they are immediately received in heaven. What is done with them may defy our understanding. Could be that a person needs healing, they pray for healing, but God sets that prayer in a store which is to bring healing into some other part of the creation. God knows what He does with our prayers, but it is our prayers that are so precious to Him because they give Him the fuel to bring blessing into the world. With that, my dear friends, I would like to bring our session today to a conclusion, and we now begin our intermission until we come to, God willing, Monday, 21st of November, when, with God's help, I hope to be back in Israel, in Yerushalayim, and hope to resume our study program with the study of Mishle in Proverbs and the study of Masechet Chulin in the Mishnah. And I hope and pray we will find time also to bring in our other studies of inspiration and thereby fulfill the threefold path of the Torah of studying Mikra, Mishnah, and Gemara. I'd like to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. By the time we meet again, we shall know the results of this critical election this coming week. But whichever way it goes, you and I have our own work cut out for us, which is the work of the Torah, the work of the commandments. It is not we who are choosing the government. It is God who has chosen us as His witnesses and His servants to spread His government and His kingship in the world. Shabbat Shalom, my dear friends. Please feel free to keep in touch with me on the email, and where possible I will respond to you. And I wish you well, I wish you blessing, I wish you peace, I wish you Shabbat Shalom, bracha, hatzlacha, and that God's light should shine to you. Shalom now from Yerushalayim. Shalom, my dear friends.
Barboremos lo vedogim lehisanag vesanogi lehisanag vesanogi barboremos lo vedogim na 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 la la la